The budget gaming CPUs are back, but this time they're not from AMD, they're from Intel. What's up guys, TechLab here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a budget CPU. This is the Intel Core i3-12100F, and ever since the day it was released and we saw everybody raving about it, we have really wanted one. It is a quad-core processor that we've now been running in our test bench for over 2 weeks, and if I'm honest, it's kept up with every graphics card that we've tested in that system. It'll currently cost you around £100, which is definitely a budget price, and for that, you're going to be getting 4 cores, 8 threads, and a max turbo frequency of 4.3 GHz. Being an F model, it doesn't come with onboard graphics, but I'm sure most gamers out there would want to use a discrete GPU anyway. But don't think just from those specs that this is a slouch, because it absolutely isn't. And to show you that, we've been doing some benchmarking. Now, we're not generally interested in productivity in terms of these CPUs because we want to use them purely for gaming, but we've done some productivity tests using Cinebench R23. And to give you something to measure how well it scores, we've tested all of the CPUs that we've got available to us. When it comes to the multi-core test, the i3-12100F isn't actually the worst from our test suite. It scores quite highly when compared to the Core i5-10400F, which really shows how much Intel have improved over the generations. Of course, when comparing to some of the AMD CPUs, particularly the AMD Ryzen 3800X, the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, and the AMD Ryzen 5 3600X, it does kind of fall behind. And that's mostly because of all the cores and threads that those processors have, and they aren't slouches themselves. But everything changes when we take a look at the singles core scores. When running the single core benchmarks, the Core i3-12100F absolutely destroys everything in our test suite, pacing out the Ryzen 5 5600X. Now that is absolutely phenomenal for a 4-core 8-thread processor, particularly when the Ryzen 5 5600X is a pretty fast CPU, specifically when it comes to gaming. And as you can see from those benchmarks, when it comes to single core processing, Intel have done an amazing job of the 12 series, even down to their i3 processors. Now, I was quite shocked at those results because I was always under the belief that the 12100F in particular was pretty much on par with the Ryzen 5 5600X. It is the processor that I actually use in my main gaming system, although I'm starting to question why I'm doing it, particularly when I can get something like this, which is only £100, which will probably game perfectly fine. But of course, we wanted to find that out, so we needed to do some gaming benchmarks. For our gaming benchmarks, we've picked a pretty standard suite that we normally use, but we've actually paired it up with this. This is the Intel Arc A770, and it is from Intel. It's one of the highest graphics cards that they do, and I thought, why not pair them together to see how Intel can hold itself. And I'm going to tell you now that it actually did fantastic. Let's take a look at some of those benchmarks, and then we'll discuss the results. So as you can see from those benchmarks, the Intel Core i3-12100F is no slouch. It managed to keep up really well with the A770. In fact, for those of you out there with a keen eye watching those metrics in the corner, you will see that in most games they pair brilliantly together. To make sure that we're getting the maximum out of our CPU, we did all of our tests using a 1080p resolution. When it came to presets, we used the maximum preset for each game, and for every game, we managed to get over a 60 frames per second average. Back to Blood is a new title that we've added to our test suite, and when running in ultra settings, we managed to get an average of 180 FPS. Now, even though the 1% lows were pretty much half of that, it wouldn't make that much of a difference because even the 1% lows, including the 0.1% lows, were over 60 frames per second. So the game was actually pretty smooth. In Cyberpunk 2077, on high settings, we managed to get an average of 63 frames per second, but this game was more limited to the graphics card itself, not the CPU, getting 1% lows down in the 30s. Again, it was reasonably smooth and you couldn't really tell, but obviously it wasn't as impressive as Back 4 Blood. In Death Stranding, using the very high settings, we managed to get an average of 73 frames per second with decent 1% lows. And then in Horizon Zero Dawn, using ultimate settings, we managed to get an average of 63. That was a very similar performance to what we saw in Cyberpunk 2077, which suggests that both of these games are fully utilizing one of these components. The last game we tested was WRC 8, just to give a bit of variety, and we ran that in very high, and we managed to get an average of 107 frames per second. The 1% lows for this game were 80 and above, so again, it was a really smooth gameplay experience. So now that you've seen the benchmarks, we hope you're as impressed with this CPU as we are. In fact, it did so well that we're thinking about keeping this around in our test machine for a little while longer. And for those of you wanting to know how well it actually performs with something like an AMD graphics card, in a recent video, we tested the AMD Radeon RX 6600, and we actually used it in the test system that this CPU was installed in. In short, it did really well, but it's worth checking out that video, and we'll link it at the end if you want to. Now, Intel have done such a fantastic job on this CPU, particularly when it comes at the price point of only £100, I truly believe that the budget gaming CPUs are back. It's a shame that it wasn't from AMD because they've always held that crown, but it looks like Intel have started to take it back. Being a 12th gen CPU, this will fit in both a 600 or a 700 series Intel board, and when it comes to those platforms, you're going to be able to have a choice of between DDR4 or DDR5, something you can't do with a Ryzen 5000. That makes this actually a decent upgrade path because you can always swap your board out, go for some DDR5 later, and also get all the benefits of a PCIe Generation 4 system. Now let us know in the comments below what you think of this CPU. Is it something that you're going to consider going out and getting if you're a budget gamer, or do you already have one? And if you do, let us know of your experience below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video if you like this kind of content, and we'll catch you in the next one.